So here's an example. We've got a 4x6 raised bed here, so 24 square foot. We want one. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Sunday, September 28th here in South Georgia. And on today's video, we're gonna get some of these beautiful plugs here planted in these raised beds behind me for the fall and winter garden. And I'm gonna tell you why I'm not the biggest fan of what they call square foot gardening and what I prefer to do instead. So a few videos ago, I showed you how we get all these beds ready for fall planting, cutting any existing plants at soil level, adding a little fertilizer, and then topping them off with some more bed mix. On that video, we just did a couple beds, but I've since got another trailer load of bed mix. So I got all these ready a few days ago. They're ready to plant. And on our last video, I showed you how we plant greens in these small round raised beds. So we put some Savannah mustard seeds in this bed. They're just now starting to pop through the soil a little bit. And on that same video, we planted some all-top turnip seeds in this bed. They're popping through a good bit more. You'll notice that this soil in this bed is not near as level. I'm pretty sure one of my chickens jumped up here and scratched around. I'm surprised the seeds have germinated as well as they did. And I know it was a chicken because look at there, there's your sign. But anyways, today we're going to be planting some of these plugs here. We're going to be transplanting versus direct seeding, which we did on the last video. We grew these out in the greenhouse and did several videos showing you how we grow out these nice looking plugs here. Now, if you do a lot of raised bed gardening, you're probably familiar with this idea of square foot gardening, where you break your bed up into these 1 foot squares, and there's a guide that tells you how many plants of a particular vegetable you can plant in that 1 foot square. Sometimes it may just be one plant of broccoli or cabbage, or it may tell you how many carrot seeds to plant there, so on and so forth. Now, I'm not here today just to poop on the square foot gardening method. I actually think it can be very helpful, especially for beginner gardeners. So if you're a beginner gardener and you've never grown some of these fall veggies that we're going to plant today, things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, collards, if you've never grown any of those things, you have no idea how much space a mature plant for either of those veggies is going to occupy. And you probably also don't know the consequences of planting them too close, maybe reducing your end harvest because you've overcrowded things a bit. So square foot gardening is great for beginners, helps them kind of visualize, okay, this is how many plants I need for this 4x6 bed I have. This is how I need to organize it out and make sure everything has ample space to thrive. And the square foot gardening is also very useful for people who have maybe only 1 or 2 raised beds. Here behind me, we've got 10, so we've got a little more wiggle room. We don't have to make sure we're using every single inch of space in those beds because we've got plenty of space. But if you've just got 1 or 2 beds, you want to maximize the space in those beds. So you may want to break it down per square foot there and really pack things tight. So there are several good reasons to go with the square foot gardening route. Now let me tell you why I don't use it specifically in my raised bed. So number one would be different nutrient requirements. And let me give you an example here. If I were to plant carrots and Brussels sprouts in the same bed, it's going to be hard for me to really keep both of them happy. For carrots, we usually feed them a balanced fertilizer. Some people even feed them kind of a potassium and phosphorus rich fertilizer. Something balanced, or maybe something leaning a little more towards the P and K. That's what's going to give you a good harvest of carrots. You give carrots too much nitrogen, you're going to make all top and not a whole lot of root. And with carrots, we're looking for that root. Brussels sprouts, on the other hand, we do give them some balanced fertilizer at planting or right after planting, but that's a veggie that we really need to hammer with the nitrogen to get some good solid production. So if I've got a square foot of carrots here and I've got a Brussels sprout plant here and I'm trying to really maximize what I can get out of each of those, so that's going to be really hard to do because they have different nutrient needs. So if we try to hit a home run on the Brussels sprouts, we're probably going to end up giving our carrots too much nitrogen, making too much top, not enough root. If we try to hit a home run on the carrots, we're probably not going to give our Brussels sprouts enough nitrogen and not really get a lot of nice, well-rounded sprouts on the stalk there. So for a beginner gardener, someone with the simple goal of, hey, I planted this, it grew, I was able to harvest something that I could eat. Nothing wrong with that technique at all. But for somebody that's really trying to maximize what they can get out of every plant in their garden, you know, planting those two things side by side may not be the best idea. And then the second reason I don't really use square foot gardening would be because of different maturity dates. So if we plant a bunch of different stuff in a single raised bed, not all that stuff is going to mature at the same time. Some stuff like lettuce may mature in 40 to 50 days. Other things like Brussels sprouts may be there a long time. They take forever. Carrots typically take a long while down here when we overwinter them like we do. So if we plant a bunch of different stuff in a given bed, the fast maturing stuff is going to be done while we're waiting on some of the longer maturing stuff in the bed. As a result, we're going to end up with these gaps in the bed. Now, there's nothing wrong with having those gaps in the bed, and a lot of times we can fill those gaps with other stuff, do some succession planting, things like that. But depending on where we are in the season, there may not be a whole lot we can fill into those gaps. If we're in late winter, you know, there's only certain things we can plant around that time. If we're in late spring, there's only certain things we can fill in then, because we know it will soon be too hot around here to grow certain veggies. So you have to take that into consideration. Another thing to consider with the maturity dates here, and I've had this happen in some of my in-ground garden plots before, when you plant a bunch of different stuff in the same plot or the same rows, stuff that has different maturity dates, you just end up kicking the can down the road further and further as you fill in those gaps and plant more stuff. And the next thing you know, you have pushed your gardening plot or your bed pretty hard for too long. And I'm a big believer in giving my in-ground plots and even these raised beds here a little break sometimes. You know, restore that nutrient supply, cover crop them sometimes, top off those beds. It's good to give them a little break every now and then. And if you're just constantly filling in gaps, you won't really be giving them a break. So those are the two main reasons I don't use square foot gardening. Other reasons why it may not be the best thing, you got to think about shade competition. If you plant something that's relatively short versus something that's relatively tall, it may end up shading it out. That could be a good thing if you're trying to protect it from the heat, but if you're growing in the winter where there's not a whole lot of sunlight available and it's not getting any, that could be a bad thing. And also you have to think about pest and disease management a little bit here. If you've got a certain veggie that you plant that tends to get hammered by pests, and you plant a bunch of other veggies around that one that tends to get hammered, you might could expect all the rest of them in that bed to get hammered as well. So like I said earlier, square foot gardening is not a bad idea on paper. There are just some things you should consider before diving into it head first. So instead of planting all these different things per square foot in a given bed, this is the way I prefer to do it. So instead, I like to group things based on nutrient needs. So if I had a bed where I was going to plant carrots, but I also had room to plant other stuff, I would plant other root veggies there. I would plant something like beets or parsnips. Things that are going to have relatively the same nutrient demands as those carrots. Additionally, if I was going to plant a bed of Brussels sprouts, but I had some extra room in there, I would put something like cabbage in there, something that also would benefit from those heavy nitrogen applications. So I like to group things based on nutrient needs. I also like to group things based on maturity dates. For example, with my brassicas that I'll be planting today, I like to plant my broccoli and cauliflower in the same bed or in the same row because they usually finish around the same time. Brussels sprouts can take much longer, and I don't like mixing those two in a given bed. So think about when things mature and try to put those things with similar maturity dates in the same bed. And then lastly, specifically for fall and winter gardening, I like to group things based on cold hardiness. So if I were to plant a bunch of different things in each of these 10 beds here, when we did start getting some cold weather, say we were going to get down to 25 degrees one night, I'd probably have to cover every single bed I've got out here, because if it had a mix of things in it, in that mix there'd probably be some things that were really cold tolerant and some things that weren't as cold tolerant. But if I were to group things based on cold tolerance, I only have to cover a few of these beds. It never gets cold enough down here to hurt Brussels sprouts. Really never gets cold enough down here to hurt carrots either. So there are certain things I never have to cover. There are other things that I would have to cover. For instance, some broccoli heads that were just starting to form, or some cauliflower heads that were just starting to form. If we mix and match stuff a lot, I'm gonna have to cover all the beds. I'd rather not do that and rather just cover the stuff that will be susceptible when we get, say, down to 25 degrees. Now the idea that this cauliflower plant right here is going to require 1 square foot of space in whatever raised bed I put it in is still a very sound principle, and I think those parts of the square foot gardening thing are still very useful to a lot of gardeners. Give you an idea of just how much space each plant needs. And we'll kind of use that idea as we're putting some plants in these beds here in a minute. The idea that whether it's cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, a lot of these brassicas like that, you just figure on 1 square foot of space per plant. You can crowd them closer than that, but there might be some consequences come harvest time. So here's an example. We've got a 4x6 raised bed here, so 24 square foot. We want 1 plant per square foot. We need 24 plants, or that's how many plants we can comfortably fit in this bed. And I already had 4 lines of drip tape in this bed here, so it makes sense just to put 6 plants per row. You don't have to get a tape measure out on this stuff here. It's not going to matter if you go 11 inches between plants or 13 inches between plants. Eyeballing it will be just fine. I didn't measure this out. I just knew if I had 4 rows, I need to put about 6 plants per row, so we just eyeball it like you see there. That will be just fine. And we want to plant things with similar nutrient needs in the same bed. So this bed is going to be mostly cauliflower. So our first row here is clementine cauliflower, a nice pretty orange cauliflower. We have another row of cauliflower. This is deep purple, a purple cauliflower. Then we have amazing, which is a white cauliflower. And then I've got a row of imperial broccoli on the end here. So we are mixing some broccoli into it, but we feed broccoli and cauliflower pretty much the same way. They have similar maturity dates, so it should be just fine. So I went ahead and turned my water on here. You can see those lines are inflated now, and we just want to start sticking these puppies in the ground. We don't need to put down any pre-plant fertilizer. We already did that when we prepped these beds. We put down a nice base layer of coop grow before we top these beds off with more bed mix. So as soon as these things overcome any transplant shock, start spreading roots out, they'll be able to access that nutrient supply and have a good little head start. We'll just scratch some little holes here. We don't need to plant these babies too deep. We just want to make sure we're not overcrowding them here. And based on a little square foot principle, should be just fine. And just like that, we've got a lot of good groceries planted in this little raised bed here. We'll end up getting 18 heads of cauliflower, all different colors, and 6 heads of broccoli out of this small space here. So if you have the space, think about grouping these fall and winter veggies together based on the criteria that I gave you earlier: nutrient needs, maturity date, cold hardiness, things like that. And I think you'll have a better strategy going into the cooler months. But if you are limited on space, feel free to pack things in there as tightly as you like and try to get as much from that bed as you can get from it. And I guess I should have mentioned this earlier. This is just me personally. I'm a very detailed and organized person. Just the idea of having all this different stuff in a single bed to me just seems really chaotic. Gives me anxiety just thinking about it. So I like to compartmentalize things based on what they need. I think it's more neat and organized that way. But if you don't mind the chaos, and it's not really chaos, but to me it is, if you don't mind it, go for it, have fun with it, do what you want to do, try different things. Just want to explain to you why we do it the way we do it in our garden. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and let me know in the comments below, do you like my way, or you like the way of mixing and matching all this different stuff? Maybe that doesn't bother you one bit at all. And as always, you can find seeds for a lot of these different veggies we're planting around here on our website at lazydogfarm.com. And if you missed that video showing how we prep these beds and why we don't pull those plants up, you can watch that right here. We'll walk you through the process of transitioning from kind of late summer stuff to fall or cool season stuff. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.